Hello, I'm Peter Murray. I'm Curator-in-Chief at New London Architecture, and I'm joined today by Lynn Osmond. She's CEO and President of the Chicago Architecture Centre, by Ben Prosky, Executive Director of the AIA in New York and their Centre for Architecture, and by Kent Martinussen, who is Director of the Danish Architecture Centre. And we're all four members of the Association of Architectural Organizations. So I'm very keen to hear what they have to say about cities, about the impact of COVID-19 and what their particular cities are doing about it. So Ken, perhaps we could start with you because you're about to come out of lockdown. Tell us what's happening in Copenhagen.
So I think in Copenhagen, it's like other cities, very much changed in terms of experiencing a city more or less for the first time in history where you can really walk around almost being alone, but that's changing right now. So people are coming out, kids in the schools, especially the younger classes are starting up. And if we look into kind of the general attitude here, it's really, I would say, relatively relaxed. We have this, maybe to a certain extent, overwhelming trust in our welfare society and welfare state. So there's a feeling of very good information and a kind of rolling out day by day the way we should work together and behave in the public space and school and at work. And it works, actually. It works quite well. If we look at, the more kind of theoretical implications of this, because I think there's a lot of theory to it right now, what we can see is that right now, and this is from a fresh analysis of the market, is that there is certainly a pressure on apartments in the city. Now that is part of the strategy of Copenhagen, is to make a huge densification of the city to be sustainable on the long run. So that is going on with a quite rapid pace. It's only in small Denmark and Copenhagen, but it's going on. And that has not been stopped, but obviously the interest in the market for apartments has been almost stopped totally. On the other hand, we see that the interest of what we call cottages or summer houses is rising to the double of before, and that goes to a certain extent also for what do you call them, detached villas in the suburbs. So that's something that we can see right now, but to be quite honest, it's not really a trend in the sense that it doesn't really tell us anything about how will the market straighten out. Will it be changed over the next month or next year or two? There is a general perception from the National Bank and from our analytical institutions on the housing situation that it won't be that much affected, actually. And if I had to just to finish my first remarks here, saying that if you look at it on a more theoretical point of view, I believe that what would be maybe the most likely to happen, and I'm not saying this on behalf on the entire world, would be that the impact on the cities would be less on the physical design of the cities, in particular less on the existing cities, than it would be actually on our more internal way of using medicine, using protection, but also changing our way of being together. So, for instance, we are now talking about that we believe that for the next year, we would work very intensely with social distancing in the public space, as we will in workplaces and in schools. And we are just having our first test in these days as all the kids are coming back to school. And the immediate impact is that the capacity on a physical level is only like 40 to 50%.
So you actually see social distancing, physical distancing remaining in place for another 12 months. That's government situation, is it?
Yeah, and I think our Prime Minister has even been criticized for being too negative or pessimistic, saying that this might be even forever or for a very long time, maybe even forever, that we will see a changed social behavior. I tend to agree with those who are critical about this statement, in the sense that what I said before, I really believe that there'll be so much work on how could we, use medicine, how could we change the way we work together, and other remedies, rather than believing that our physical environment and our social behavior will change radically. I'm just right now, today, I'm in contact with a good friend in Shanghai who says it's really back to normal. There's no changes. Most of us know that they do have a protection, most of them. So that is a change after all. But their experience right here today, this morning, was that Shanghai is back to normal now.
Really?
Yeah.
Ben, how are things in New York?
I think for, architects in New York City, we've been through a lot. We've been through downturns. We've been through economic downturns like in 2008 and after that. And then, of course, 9/11 and what happened in 2001 in terms of instability. And, I'm of two minds. I share with Kent this view that despite many incredible changes, some things will go back to normal, and people's behaviors or their acceptance may be modified. But on the other hand, this is the word unprecedented is really true here. The rules of this, it's not the same as 9/11, where there was a kind of catastrophe that we then could understand and rebuild from without it expanding. I do liken it, though, to the threat of terrorism that we learned to live with, and we lost a lot of freedoms with these ongoing terrorist attacks, which, like a plague, like a thing, kept coming back in an unexpected ways. And we had to adapt our psyches, our sense of freedom in terms of travel and public gatherings, and our spaces, right? We were surveilled much more. Our habits in terms of going through airports to even entering an office building in Manhattan completely changed, and we lost certain liberties, but humans have a way of sort of readjusting. And so while I can't predict in urban space exactly what will change in New York, I do think that there will be changes, and I think that there will be a sort of behavioral adaptation to that change. I think again, back to it, the threat of terrorism was so high and been so high, and many worried that it would stop people from gathering in large ways, but people did. And whether it's that they just felt security was better or that they felt that it was worth the risk, I'm unsure. I think back to the unprecedented thing, which is really just disheartening, is New York, as many cities, was on a boom, right? They recorded over the past year was the largest construction boom in New York City, even out past the Gilded Era. There were never that many cranes or construction starts going. And all of this, of course, has been ground to a halt. Whether the growth was so strategic all the time and it merits some correction, I certainly do not wish this pandemic as a way of correcting the growth in any way, shape, or form. But the shutdown of the government has been the thing that's really, really affected architecture firms, meaning people, some people's private clients have stayed on, some have put on pause. But for example, New York City has always paid people for design work during economic downturns. The Department of Design and Construction and others have always allowed design work. The difference in this time is that all design work was stopped. So architects who were keeping their offices together with, some city contracts on, maybe libraries or other infrastructure that had been approved and was moving forward, had thought that they would be able to continue work on this. There's been a stop work on all design, and so the kind of lifeblood has been cut off. What's more is many depended on this payroll protection plan, PPP, that the federal government rolled out, which was supposed to help small businesses for about 2 months maintain their overhead or at least pay their salaries. And many people did not get it who thought they would. And so there'd been this kind of hope that that was going to sustain a lot of small businesses, including architecture firms, and they didn't get it. And so we now find ourselves in a predicament where we're not sure when city contracts will start up. We also are unsure what will happen to the workforce. As Kent was saying, the interest in going out of the city and sort of second homes or country cottages, or people just going to where their parents are. I had a discussion with the Department of Design and Construction New York, who manages the big public works, and they said, well, we're going to be contacting the architecture firms to see when we're ready to restart these programs, how ready will they be? And I said, you have to be aware that many of the people have left, and they might not be coming back to the city if the prospects of long-term employment are not there. And so there will be real questions in terms of the design architecture workforce, the ability to get these projects started again. And these, of course, I'm talking about projects that were needed in the works. There's then, of course, this discussion of a reprioritization. What needs to happen first? How does the already subway system that was struggling so much under intense ridership is virtually come to a standstill? I had a call with the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which is essentially the subways and buses. They were losing, at this moment, ridership is down by 90%. They were losing around $200 million a week. This is an agency that's already billions of dollars in debt and was struggling to get back. How will they recoup? What will be the projects to actually get them on their feet? And then what about these advances that we needed to take care of? I'd say lastly, on a positive note, the community has been wonderful. So despite all these architecture firms being cut, all these sort of inabilities to be together in person, we have seen an upsurge in desires to have firms talking to each other. So we've set up calls amongst small size firms just for them to swap information and survival techniques, calls between medium sized firms. And then a whole COVID-19 task force has started where firms that had fabrication materials to make personal protective gear for hospitals and so on have been making it and sharing it. And this is including the architecture schools. So even when the people have seen all their revenue dry up, they have been wanting to help each other. And the Center for Architecture has been thrilled at helping to facilitate those connections.
Thank you, Ben. Lynn, over to you.
I think one of the things that's interesting for us, we have 2 Europeans and 2, well, you're still a European, Peter, even though we're changing that, and 2 Americans. And I think one of the big things that when you look at the social nets, and it's going to be interesting to see how America comes out of this and how we feel about it, because we went into this, there was a great article in The Economist that talked about we are probably the least prepared to go into this because we don't have a comprehensive medical system. It's delivered on an individualized basis through corporations. So we've got a lot of people who have no health care, or really are reluctant to go to the doctor because they're either going to have to self-pay or they can't take time off work. And we also have inequity in the workplace because we have very low wages for a lot of our employees, our service workers. So it's going to be interesting to see if we come out of this with a realization that we need a more equitable society. So that's kind of holistic. Coming to Chicago, it's been interesting because we've had a very conservative governors, and I think we all are aware of the fight between the governors and the federal government and in certain states, especially the blue states. But we have, we've got a great mayor, and we've come out with, we stopped very early going to work. So we closed down on March 13th, and all the museums closed together. And we have we're in the process of flattening the curve. I think it's happening, but we have now, 2 days ago, the mayor closed all the schools, the governor closed all the schools in Illinois till the end of the school year. So that's being done. So even if we did come back, we have a reduced workforce because of childcare. We are technically closed until April 30th. I think we'll probably be closed until the end of May. We are, I'm very involved because I'm on the tourism board, vice chair, and what we're now doing is a reentry program. And what we're probably seeing is that the museums and attractions won't be allowed to even start until sometime after July 1. So that we're, in the final quadrant that will be released to start. And even then it will be social distancing. I don't think we're going to see an event over 100 people for a long time in the city. And that's kind of, there's a great report I'll share with you that was done by McKinsey that talks about coming out of COVID. And, that is one of the strong recommendations about social distancing and also about the limitations on number of people gathering. We've been recommended to wear masks. I think it'll become like you, Ben, where we'll have to wear masks. And then we're also, we've getting ready to open. We're all purchasing our thermometers because we know that we've been, the indications are that we'll have to take temperature checks for all our patrons and all our staff in order for them to return to the workplace and sanitizing. And then our governor said that we're not returning until there's better testing. So we can do 3,000 tests a day. He wants to get it up to at least 6,000 tests. And then he'll feel comfortable that we have enough tests to be able to do it. I think we're probably all hearing that, until there's a vaccine, that there will be, serious restrictions on social distancing. So the analogy that Ben was using is exactly what we've been using, is that after 9/11, all our public spaces changed, the way we dealt with each other changed, the ability to share data changed, so that it's really that terrorism is very much the analogy, that airports don't look the same, office buildings won't look the same. So this week I'm doing an interview with Sam Mosefa from Seattle. He's planning director there. And, they're a bit earlier from us because they went into it first. But one of the things that I want to press with Sam is the whole thing about how it affects our infrastructure of cities and our transportation. Because before they went into the crisis, the city of Seattle was already working with Amazon to do a rotating work from home for its employees. And Amazon was a bit reluctant on getting into this, as I understand it. But they were rotating so that, they could manage the peak times. Like, some employees came in Thursdays, some came in Fridays. And now that they've seen work from home is now the new normal for so many people, and people are being accepting of it, is do we really need to build out these new highway systems when we can really do load adjustments through the way our employees work? And I think about a conversation, Peter, that you and I had a debate about polycentric cities. And I think we're going to see more polycentric cities where, it's really the live work, that many of our parents had is now going to be encouraged. So I think that will be an interesting play out. And then we've been working on a program with Related Midwest, they've got a lot of high rises under construction right now. And they're trying to kind of understand, like, do we make adjustments before these buildings are finished? Because people are going to want to use elevators differently and capacity loads and the way people are going to interact with buildings. And so what adjustments do they see big picture for, for residential high rise, of which we have a lot. Like Ben, we were on a real construction boom. And then also look at, the way it affects offices. And what we're hearing is that, there will be, you'll have to reduce your workload so that your offices, we're talking about, how do you adjust so that maybe only 40% of your office staff are in, so that you can have accommodate social distancing, the 6-foot rule. But I think also I'll wrap up with saying, as we approach Earth Day, I think this is really an interesting kind of pivot point for us, that we've dreamed about a world without fossil fuels. Well, guess what? We just hit a zero in terms of the cost, and what's that doing to the economic impact of the world? but also on the other side, what advantages that, we can now hear the birds, we've got so many more birds in our neighborhoods than I ever remember before. What's going on with the ecology of our cities and the environment. So how do we also look at that as part of this whole, never let a good crisis go to waste?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Well, it's interesting that Chicago's adopted "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." I always thought it's Churchill, but Rahm Emanuel seems to be the person who's credited with it most. Whoever thought of it, I would agree absolutely. And there do seem to be quite a lot of positive things coming out of COVID-19, which we need to hang on to rather than go back to normal, as seems to be happening, as Kent says, in Shanghai. But I think to pick up some of the points that have made already, I really am interested in that comparison with the impact of terrorism and the effect that that has had on our cities. I think that's a really interesting route to explore. But from London's point of view, we've been seeing people leaving the city, younger people particularly leaving the city over recent years because of high cost of housing, largely. Whether housing will remain at its same levels after this, I don't know, but I also do think that we will see some movement, at least out of the centre. The London School of Economics did some research quite recently on high density living in London. They found that most people actually were perfectly happy living in their apartments, except those people with growing families who were keen to get out a place with more space. I think there will be greater pressure after this for people to have more space, even in higher density environments, to ensure that they have some access to the outside, better distribution of public space. And I would see a move to outer London areas at greater speed than we've been seeing. So I think it will accelerate a number of changes, some of which we're seeing already. Just like home working and how that impacts on offices. Obviously, there has been an impact on the way we use offices over the last 15 to 20 years of digital technology. But COVID-19, I think, has accelerated that hugely. And it'll be interesting to see how the impact that has on the demand for office space generally. Transport is really interesting because this will, I think, push forward. We have strategies under the new London plan, under Sadiq Khan, to deliver much more active travel. From at the moment, just over 60% of people travel to work by walking, cycling and public transport. He has a target to deliver 80% by 2041. But the active bit is fine. Walking and cycling, I think we'll see a huge surge in both of those once we get back. But actually the difficulties of using crowded underground tube lines is going to be problematical if we're looking into physical distancing when we go back. I think we're also seeing real changes to the acceleration again of problems with retail. That huge move, obviously, to online selling over recent weeks, and that doesn't bode well for high streets and malls. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens. And Ben and I we're organising a get together on that subject in a few weeks' time. So it'll be interesting to see how we come out of that. But I think, interesting enough, because a lot of people are stuck in their homes, they are able to go shopping, but they go shopping locally. So actually local food shops are doing rather well. And I think that might focus more on localism. So I think picking up Lynn's point about the polycentric city, what I would see again, that polycentrism of London, where we've always had London's towns, which are set out around the centre, that have been struggling really in recent years. I can see them actually benefiting from this as people really spend more time in their local areas. And because of digital working, they will be spending more time in the future in their homes, and therefore using local facilities. So I think that's could be good for a polycentric city. Then I think the last thing, a point I would make is that we mustn't forget that actually there is a much bigger problem out there, and that's climate change, and that actually the number of people who have died as a result of COVID-19 is pretty small compared to those that will die from climate change if we don't do something about it. And I think that going back to normal is really not a solution to that. And I hope that maybe people's realization that actually we live on a rather fragile planet might actually mean that they take that very serious element even more seriously in the future. There were 2 points which really struck me. One was the terrorism aspect, but also Lynn talked about the equitable city. And it seems to me that one of the problems that might happen if people, middle classes, start moving out to suburban areas or country dachas, then what does that mean? That actually cities, once again, as they were in the 19th century, become a place of the poor rather than might say, the well-to-do.
I think so much depends on real estate values also, and how they're going to be affected in the city after this. And of course, we don't know. I imagine that many people in terms of middle or upper middle class have an idea that there might be an ability to split time between being in a more rural place and being in a city, and that maybe the idea of having a room or a pied-à-terre or something in the city that allows you to come in and do some work is countered with having a place outside of the city. I mean, in New York, and a lot of these high-rise buildings, many of them are owned but unoccupied because they're owned as investments by people who live elsewhere. And it's been a big problem in terms of, communities in the city. Essentially this idea of sort of having stock in the air. And so, I think, yes, I wonder about that kind of relationship between, exurban and near, rural areas and the city. If there's going to be a lot more movement, which of course then does mean improvements in transportation and rail and roads that we desperately need. I would say for architecture, there's been a real resistance for remote either working in architecture firms or even in architecture schools. The idea of doing a crit or even just working on a project remotely seemed impossible, and everyone has had to do it. And I've spoken to many of the members at the AIA who said that, actually we can do it. We actually can design and share things on our screens and share documents. And yes, there's nothing like hovering over somebody's desk and looking at a drawing, but at the same time, it isn't impossible. And so I do think that there might be more flexibility in terms of the way architecture is practiced or even taught. And I think that could be a positive and inclusive thing.
Yeah, very good. Ken, perhaps I could pick up Ben's earlier comment about the impact of terrorism and whether coronavirus will have a similar effect on our cities. Do you think that's the case?
Of course, a lot of things happened right after 9/11, but I think today we don't really consider it, or don't consider it very much, how it is to go through an airport or whatever, the surveillance and stuff like that. It's not that it's really feeling like a change of things. So the speed is one thing, one dimension, but I think there's another dimension to it, to answer your question, which is that if we take a historical look back on the development of cities, we could go 2,000 years back or back to the Middle Ages and on to now. What we have experienced is that cities create wealth, and that kind of collective desire to be together, to invent, and also just being together culturally, socially, and work-wise seems to be such a strong drive in the human desire to exist, I would say even. So I wonder whether we would really see in-depth changes. If we go back to early modern, thinking. Now that was a reaction towards huge slummed cities, and we already have them around the globe. So we know that the impact or the payback on sanitarian investment is the highest in the world. It's like 35 times a dollar if you make sanitation around where it's not. So I wonder whether we really would see that new development in cities would be taken in consideration pandemics. I really wonder. Maybe they will, but also I think it would be very depending on to what extent, and I see that as maybe the most interesting thing that has hardly anything to do with architecture, but it does influence architecture. To what extent all the researchers and doctors around the globe and the laboratories will be able to react towards the the biology of these pandemics. So, for instance, right now, what we are learning apparently in China is that they see it coming back on the same person, but it seems to be mutating into something like a normal virus, more like a cold, a chill. And of course, that makes a huge difference if it's that way it goes, rather than being mutated into something even much more dangerous, getting at kids and young generations and so forth. So I think the real battle is actually being played right now on whether our cities will change, is being played in the laboratories to a certain extent.
We're talking about developing apps that will test people as they come in, surveying people going into buildings. So it used to be that, you didn't have to swipe to go into a building. Well, do you have to get your temperature checked to go into a building? So all these things that we thought is personal affronts on, our personal data and our personal wellness, now I think will become part of our vocabulary in a much different way. And it's going to be this constant testing. But then going also to, a bit to your point, Kent, it's going to be interesting to see how people avoid public transit or embrace and how transit changes. But I can see actually, a move back to the city, in fact, of being able to walk to work, that people are going, so that the move might be, we take out the large planter boxes on city streets that look so pretty, but quite frankly, my husband and I spend all this time avoiding them to avoid the person. So do we make our sidewalks more free and clear so that people can walk? And what does it mean to the bike lane? So that, changing some of our infrastructure of just the basic shared public space. And what does this mean for parks? I mean, that was one of your things, Peter, you got into was you live in a home so you can go outside, but people who don't live in a home, Chicago has closed off its lakefront. So all these people who bought, property close to the lake can't go on the lake, they're on city streets. So do we have enough public parks to support a healthy environment, clean environment? So I think it challenges us in some real urban planning ways, rather than, necessarily talking about the, structural part of the built environment, but really the planning aspects.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're really up, or we're slightly past time, but perhaps as a last question to each of you, has it dented your faith in cities? Lynn, let's start with you.
For me, no. I just I think about the city differently, but I think the city is a very vibrant place. It's just given us a new challenge.
Ben.
No, we need our cities. Our cities morph and change. They have over time. I think it's an amazing thing how humans adapt, and they need contact, and design will adapt with it. So I look forward to seeing what will happen and hopefully being a part of it.
Kent.
No, it hasn't really, but I do think it will be sorry, it will be really interesting to see if we will experience a new way of being together. My friend wrote me a letter from Shanghai today saying everything is back to normal except from the fact that someone takes my temperature 5 times a day. So moving around in the city was with that restriction, getting in and out of densified spaces. So I think we will see, maybe, as you say, an acceleration of some of the tendencies to decenter the cities and maybe not so dense cities, but overall, no.
Well, I'd agree. It certainly hasn't dented my faith in cities, but I do think there are quite a lot of lessons we can take out of COVID-19 that would benefit our cities, whether it's public space, cleaner air, or just an ability to collaborate better than maybe we've done in the past. So thank you, all three of you, for your contributions, and look forward to discussing this subject again in the future. Thanks. Bye.